Guilt is where I feel bad about something that I have done, whereas shame is where I feel that I am that person that is to be shameful for what I've done, right? So it's a very toxic emotion, whereas guilt is a really great opportunity for us to examine what we've done wrong, make change in our lives to prevent doing that in the future. Usually it has to do with somebody else. It's like you've offended someone else and you feel guilty about it. Yeah, whereas shame is, I am that person. I am that thief. I am that philanderer, whatever. And we take that on as who we are. Whereas guilt is just about one particular thing. So there's a pretty substantial difference.
Emerge Coaches Interview is a series focused on showcasing the expertise, process, and methodology of exceptional coaches or vetted individuals who are experts in various aspects of life. Our mission is to empower all of you who may be struggling in life by demonstrating that help is readily available. We want to serve as a bridge, connecting those in need with skilled coaches who can offer effective strategies and proven techniques for personal growth and transformation. By showcasing the success stories and insight of these exceptional coaches, we aim to convey the message that regardless of the challenges you may face, there are always ways to overcome and emerge stronger. Our guest today is Bobby Wuest, a life coach with over 20 years of practice and dedication towards inner work excavation, and facilitated over 1,000 hours of emotional process at Mankind Project. He was initiated Shamanic priest and also a former student of School of Metaphysics. Bobby Wuest has this purpose and passion in life, which is to help and encourage people to achieve their spirit's greatness. I'm really excited for you to listen to this interview and learn more from Bobby's practices and methodologies that have helped him transform his life and other people. So let's go ahead and jump in. I am very thrilled to have our guest today, Bobby, a good friend of mine. Thank you so much for joining us here in Emerge Coaches Interview. How are you doing, Bobby?
Wow. Yeah, it's great to be with you, Gladys. And I've been looking forward to this, actually.
Me too. I would really love to hear some of the practices and methodology that you can actually share to our viewers for them to have something that they can really use, something that's applicable for them that they could, use to move forward in growing themselves. So I'm excited to deep dive in the practices that we will be discussing today.
Okay. You want me to comment on that now, or?
Yeah, definitely. I want to also go back. I just have a few questions here that I would love to ask you. And first, before we deep dive in some of those practices, I just want to ask, like, what are some of the ways that you actually enjoy helping people, if you can mention those things?
Yeah. So I have a soul's purpose about helping and encouraging people to achieve their spirit's greatness. And yeah, so as you know, I've run a self-development group here. I've been either participating in or running self-development groups for most of the last 20 years. And I would say that's the single greatest thing that has led to my own personal development. Yeah, weekly, sessions where we really dig into our feelings and explore, our inner self, which we tend to ignore most of the time, particularly feelings. So, society and cultures and even family and friends kind of give us the idea that feelings are not safe, that they interfere with logic and reason. And so the best thing to do is to hide, repress, or deny them.
Mhm.
And I did that for many years, it's like I was, kind of single focused on my job and,
Mhm.
money and things like that. And then when I began with this initiative, gosh, almost 20 years ago, where feelings are encouraged to be explored and
Mhm.
expressed. And I found that when we really do pay attention to those feelings and allow those feelings rather than trying to repress them, that they really provide a great avenue into deeper self awareness, as well as coming to awareness of wounds that occurred earlier in life in which we stored negative messages about ourselves. And, it's like amazing the kind of messages that we take out of childhood for most of us. I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I'm not
Mm.
smart enough, I'm not, pretty enough or thin enough, or, I'm not lovable. If you really get to know me, you're probably going to abandon me.
Right.
All these kind of messages are pretty common for kids to come away from childhood with. And we don't know it. Those
Mm.
are hidden messages. They're deep in our guts, but they affect the way that we are day to day. And they get triggered by some external circumstance over and
Mhm.
over. And that usually end up coming out sideways. We judge people, we criticize people, we project onto people that which we don't recognize or acknowledge about
Mhm.
ourselves. And so, in my experience, feelings are the gateway to exploring these aspects of
Mhm.
ourselves that are hidden from us. And when we come to greater awareness of those messages and the role that they play in our lives, we become empowered to change the way that we respond consciously to external triggers rather than reacting unconsciously. And so it's a big step forward in terms of personal development.
That's really beautiful what you're doing. I've experienced it myself and I'm pretty surprised. I thought I've gone through a lot of inner works already, but when we actually really focus on the feeling and
Mm.
acknowledging it, those traumas, like the inner work that you facilitated with a group that I've joined, there are some emotions there that I haven't really paid attention to or I kind of forgot. So, and it, as you said, it's just hidden in the background and the things that you're doing, like the projection that you're doing towards other people, it can actually connect to that, feeling that what do you call it, suppress inside of you that you
Yeah.
haven't, you know, put into light. So I'm really excited. How can we, what are the steps that we can do to be able to free ourselves from those emotions? But first, I just want to know a little bit backstory of your life. Like, how did you develop such keen interest in what you're doing right now and, the way that you help other people?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of questions there. Which one do you want me to address first?
Yeah, first is like, how did you have such keen interest in doing what you do right now?
Yeah. So that's a long story, but I'll try to make it short.
Mhm.
I came to a point in my life that is known as middlescence. And in that middlescence point, it's like everything that came before doesn't seem to have the juice for us that it did before.
Mhm.
That the job and career, it's like, God, what's the point of this, right? Money, you know, trading hours for dollars for 50, 60, 70 hours per week. It's what's the point of that? Relationships. Are my relationships really strong and healthy? No, they're not, because I've been so focused on career and job that my relationships were just barely hanging on. And yeah, so I got to that point of middlescence and that point of really realizing that I had no real meaning to my life, that the things that had sustained me previously really were no longer, had any juice for me. And
Mhm.
it's like, well, who am I now? If I am not those things, if I'm not my job, my career, my income, my savings, my family, who am I now? And it was a real crisis for me and led to breakup of a long-term marriage.
Mhm.
in relationship with a daughter. And it got to the point where I didn't know if I really wanted to go on. And so what the psychiatrist had that I visited said is I had idealization of suicide on a daily basis. And he wanted to give me drugs for it. And of course I took the drugs because I didn't know what else to do. But through one thing or another, and I joined the 12-step group where I started learning about practicing the 12 steps, which is a kind of a spiritual path to a men's group through a circuitous route where I was invited to participate in a weekend called the New Warrior Weekend, put on by the
Mm.
men, which is a transformational weekend. I recommend it to anyone, but there's many, many different kinds of transformational weekends. And if you go through the weekend, you come out feeling really alive and vibrant. But if you don't practice what you learned on the weekend,
Mhm.
it's like putting lipstick on a pig. A month later, it's everything that you've learned is gone because you've gone back to your day-to-day life and it slips into the background. The great thing about the Mankind Project is that they encourage men who go through the weekend to join what's called
Mhm.
an integration group, which is this group of men who meet weekly to support one another, 6, 8, maybe as many as 10 men in a circle in which there are trained facilitators
Mhm.
to help us dig into those aspects of ourselves that we're not aware of. And as I went through that, I could see how really terribly wounded I had been earlier in life and how that had reflected upon the way that I was later
Mm.
in life with this focus on work and money and career. I essentially abandoned my family, which, was terrible for them. And
Mm.
it was not very fulfilling for me either. Right. And the really wound that had caused that was this I'm not good enough one,
Mm.
right? Which had come directly into childhood. And I had tried to compensate for that message, internal message that I'm not good enough. I never had it in here,
Mm.
but it was in here for many, many years, throughout all my adult years. And I overcompensated for that by demonstrating how good I was at my job,
Yeah.
right? And how good I was at earning income and to the detriment of my family life, really, right? So again, the thing that sets the Mankind Project, again, away from other kind of transformational weekends is this weekly integration group with
Mm.
trained facilitators who every week give you an opportunity to do that kind of exploration we talked about earlier, using feelings as the gateway into those untrue and hurtful inner messages that we hold. And it's like peeling an onion, it's
Right.
week in, week out, doing this kind of work, discovering new aspects of myself, healing those as I go along and realizing that eventually coming to realize that it's not a goal, it's not a destination, it's a
It's the
lifetime
journey, yeah.
journey, right? Of further self development and self awareness. And so when I left the US, I left behind also my supportive community. And there was, loving the world. And I guess after I had done that for a couple of years, and been the beneficiary of that expert facilitation in emotional
Mm.
processes, I was like, I want to learn how to do that. It seemed like magic to me. So
Mm.
I went to a series of trainings in which I learned emotional process facilitation and then, began incorporating that into my weekly I group. I became one of the expert facilitators that I saw that were so good to me in terms of my own personal development. And so I was able to help other men
Mm.
using those kind of facilitation skills. And then when I left the US, I left that community. It really is a worldwide community. But
Mm.
when I went to Mexico, there was very little sign of the Mankind Project there. So I started a group, and eventually one thing led to another, and now the Mankind Project has a pretty good presence. As a matter of fact, I think they have a weekend coming up where 40 men are going to be initiated into the
And
Mankind Project. So then as I moved from there to another country to
Mm,
eventually to the Philippines, my desire was to help others with those
mhm,
facilitation skills that I had developed. And we had a real nice group going prior to COVID, and then it was shut
mm,
down for 2 years. And then after COVID, I went looking for another place to hold it because the yoga center
mhm.
where we had been doing that was shut down. And eventually, found someone who offered his house for us to do our looking, and then we started the group up. And it went on for, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 months, but it eventually failed because people were not committed to that week in, week
Mhm.
out, showing up, putting this at the top of their calendar instead of something that, if I'm not busy, I'll show up. And
Right.
it just doesn't have a lot of value when people are that committed to their
Mhm.
personal development to show up whenever they want to. And
Exactly.
yeah,
I really appreciate, Bobby, that you shared your story from when you realized that, the career that you have, like really pursuing the outside, like sort of success that people automatically associate success with a career, having a lot of money. And yet at the end of the day, you felt that it is not fulfilling you really, and it even led to the point where you lose your family. But then meeting or first joining 12 steps, right? You said?
yeah. Uh-huh,
And then from there, you get connected to this group Mankind
uh-huh.
project. How long were you part of that group?
About 10 years while I was
Wow.
still in the US, and then I left the US after that. I'd like to say I'm still active, but to be
Hmm.
honest, I've kind of fallen away given as how they have practically no presence here in the Philippines. During COVID, it was pretty cool because I got to reunite with men that I had sat in circle with for years, in my hometown and, become a part of those weekly meetings again. But as soon as COVID
Mm.
let up, they went back to in-person meetings. And so I could no longer participate in those.
One thing I want to comment on though is like how important it is to actually have a community, a people around you that could support you and understand you and you can relate with, because I can see how powerful the effect was for you being part of that group that actually lead you to healing and realizing that, this is a lifelong journey and inspires you to also help other people. Like from the US, you brought it to Mexico and now you have it here in the Philippines. So, yeah, the community is really very important.
Yeah. A community of people that are devoted to self-development. Yeah, being surrounded by a community like that,
Mhm.
there's nothing like it. I mean, in my experience, it's like it's where real solid friendships, begin and develop.
Exactly. I want to understand better though, like how does that process of like inner work that you do with other people, how does it look like?
Yeah. So as you know, there's a couple of aspects to it. We do what's called rounds,
Mhm.
and each round takes us deeper into deeper work. And so the first round is just about feeling our feelings and really allowing our feelings, right? And when I say feeling our feelings, it's like we close our eyes, breathe deeply, and just see what's up in there. Where is our attention drawn to? Follow our breath down into our body and see what our attention is drawn into with the specific intention of trying to locate some emotion or emotions that are up for us right now. And if we, 9 times out of 10, we find something. And when we state it in terms of, people that are just coming into a new awareness of their emotions, we make it real simple for them. We say, rather than, 600 different emotions, we say mad, sad, glad, fear, shame. And
Mm.
shame and guilt are pretty close. They're actually very far apart, but they feel a lot the same in the body, right?
Right.
Guilt is where I feel bad about something that I have
Mhm.
done. whereas shame is where I feel that I am that
Mm-hmm.
person that is to be shameful for what I've done, right? So it's a very toxic emotion, whereas guilt is a really great opportunity for us to examine what we've done wrong and make change in our lives to, prevent doing that in the future. Usually it has to do with somebody else, it's like you've offended someone else and you feel
Yeah.
guilty about it. Yeah, whereas shame is, I am that person. I am that thief. I am
Mm-hmm.
that philanderer, whatever. And we take that on as who we are. Whereas guilt is just about one particular thing. So there's a pretty substantial difference. But it's, mad or angry,
Mm-hmm.
sad or grief, glad, which is, joy, happiness, fear, which is, something I'm afraid of something that's going to happen, right? Which tends to be a lot in our mind, but it ends up in our gut too.
Mm-hmm.
And then the shame or guilt that we've already talked about. So we ask people to state what they're feeling in terms of those 5 or 6 different, emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Round the second round is we give people an opportunity to realize where they are sabotaging themselves, where they're avoiding making forward progress in their life. And that's what we call a stretch and accountability round. What am I resisting? What
Mm-hmm.
am I attached to? How does that reflect on me achieving forward progress in my life? Right. And so a stretch is some small step in the direction of a change we want to make during the coming week, that is very well defined. It's specific, it's measurable, it's achievable, it's realistic, and it's timely. So if somebody says, for instance, okay, I haven't been meditating lately, but I'm going to meditate every day this week. It's like, hey, come on, let yourself off the hook. You're not taking into account, the kind of things that will come up as
Yeah.
resistance to meditating. Why don't you start with 3 days a week, 5 minutes instead of 7 days, 20 minutes
Mm-hmm.
or something like that, right? So
Exactly.
what we know is that as we make small steps, we make progress. And then the accountability portion of that is coming back to the group the following week and reporting on how you did with your stretch. And there's no shame. There's no, if you didn't make it, it's like there's a few questions about,
Mm-hmm.
how did you get in your own way? What prevented you from doing it? What did you do instead? And to raise awareness of how we are sabotaging ourselves. And then we invite people to make a stretch for the following week. So by doing so, we're able to make real forward progress in the aspect of our lives that we haven't really spent too much time reflecting on because we're so busy with the day-to-day, doing of things. So that's the second route.
Yeah, I personally really love this second round because it's something that I can do for myself, like right away. I can do it every day. And as you said, we don't have enough time to really pause and reflect on, is what I'm doing right now really helping me to move forward? So
Yeah.
being able to have that group and that stretch and accountability, it gets me thinking and asking those kind of questions. And being part of a group where you can actually share it also allows you to celebrate with other people when you achieve your goals or stretch for that week. And when you're not able to do it, it also still allows you to kind of ask yourself again, like, why? Like, what are the question? What was the things that actually stops me? And if you do it in a regular basis, it becomes like you are building a routine or a habit of self-reflection. So that's really beautiful. And I appreciate you, Bobby, for really doing that work. So it's
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah. And we'll do that again real soon. Even though the group is split up, we'll do that online in the future, right?
Exactly.
And then the third round that we do in a self-development group is we do a self-discovery round in which, you know, people reflect on something that's troubling them right now. And then we can facilitate. And again, using feelings as a gateway. What is the trouble? Where is it in your body? Does it have a shape? Does it have a color? Is it moving? Is it stagnant? And as we continue to breathe in that, then there's an opportunity to discover if that's something that is totally relevant to what happened here today, to create that feeling, or whether it's something that maybe we've experienced before, some experience from childhood with our parents or with kids on the school ground or whatever. And by doing what's called a regression back to that earlier wound, a lot of times we can discover, one, what is the message that we took from that? And two, what does that child need in order to heal from that? Right. And then we, in that deep session, and again, that tends to be a pretty deep session where the person is deep inside himself, typically with his or her eyes closed, and essentially reliving that earlier event that was the original source of the wounding and the source of the self-limiting message, and discover what we need to do in order to heal the child, at whatever age, at age 5, at age 10, age 20, that was affected by this particular situation and took that, blamed himself, typically because as a young child, we admire our parents. We want our parents' love and respect. And so they're always right. So it must be me that's wrong. Right. And so I take on the kind of self-limiting message of, I'm not good enough. I must not be a good enough child, And so when we get back to that point of the original wounding, we can discover what it is that the inner child needs in order to heal and provide that to the child, so that when we bring the person back into the present moment, there's a level of healing that has occurred, and certainly a level of self-awareness as to, how that original wound might have occurred and how it is triggered by the situation that happened this week, for instance. So there's that level of self-awareness, and the more that you do that, the more self-confident you become, the more self-love you develop. And so that's why we do this stuff weekly, because that's a progressive process. And just like peeling back the skin of an onion, it's like you get to one layer, and then the next week you might work on something totally different, or you might work on peeling back another layer of that, problem.
I'm curious, when you facilitate this kind of work with other people and they've done that inner work of really understanding and going deep to that trauma that they had, and they were able to open it up, and for that session they feel they were able to understand it and heal from it, is there a chance that just one session can sort of fix everything, or not really?
Not in my experience. In my experience, it's a progressive process. You get another layer of healing each time that you do something like that. And I'll give you an example. I thought that I had pretty well healed this message that I had about not good enough.
Mm.
And then I was having a conversation with a couple other people, one of which was a girl that I had a lot of respect for. And I kept telling her that her beliefs were wrong, that, this is the way she should be thinking about this. And, in my wisdom, I wanted to enlighten her. And she finally called me on it. And when I looked at it, it was like, what is it about me that tries to be so self-righteous where I can, try to enlighten someone else? And it was that not good enough wound again, but it was coming out in a different way. It was coming out as what's called an overcompensation strategy. Yeah, I wasn't good enough, or I wasn't smart enough. And now I try to overcompensate for that by, being smarter or wiser and, the source of wisdom for this woman. She didn't appreciate it, obviously. Thank God she called me on it because, again, had she not, I would have gone on with it. But
Mhm.
when she did, I was able to reflect on that and see exactly how that, related back to things that I'd spent a lot of time healing already.
Yeah. It's amazing how you receive that kind of feedback, and instead of getting offended, you're actually able to see it as an invitation to actually learn, to look back within yourself and reflect on it. That's really nice. Like it's something I'm working on, receiving constructive feedback and really not getting offended about or getting mad about it. Instead, like seeing it as, an opportunity for me to understand better about my own self because it's
Mm,
very powerful.
mm. Yeah, on a good day, I'm pretty self-aware, and there's, not all that many good days, but it's like each opportunity to look at something like that and reflect on something like that leads to deeper self-awareness.
Just one thing, like, because when I started in this journey of really trying to understand myself and trying to understand my feelings and emotion, there's part of that journey where I feel like, oh my God, if I go deeper into this, it would be so crazy because there's so many things. Like every day, I feel like I'm discovering worse and worse things inside of me. And part of me is wanting to like back out. Like, you know what? I'm just going to be unconscious and not even pay attention. What would you say to those people who's actually in that, like in that path? Like they're having two thoughts whether or not they want to push forward or they're just gonna back out.
Yeah. So I'm thinking of one particular session that we did where one of the people, claimed that they had already done a lot of healing on this
Mm.
and they really resisted going deep. That's ego. That's ego.
Mm.
It's like I've already healed this. I don't need any more healing. Well, anybody that says they don't need any more healing for something, an issue that they're already aware of, you know, that's ego resisting any kind of further work, right? The ego doesn't really want us to, it resists deeper self-awareness, right? And the ego wants to tell us that we know who we are and we're in
Mhm.
control and so on and so forth. Well, there's a whole lot of vulnerability that's required in order to do deep inner work. And the ego sure doesn't like being vulnerable, right? The ego wants to be tough and strong.
Mm.
It wants to be in control. And we really have to dive deep beneath the ego in order to get to those kind of places where healing resides.
Exactly. And I would even say that being vulnerable actually shows a lot of strength in someone. If I see a person who's being vulnerable and authentic and expressing their feeling, I really admire that person because for me, I thought not crying is, if you don't cry, you're strong enough, you're tough, but
Yeah,
actually, you're not. You're afraid, you're scared, you're like trying to build a wall. Whereas
yeah,
if you're vulnerable in expressing your feeling, that shows a lot of courage and strength there because
absolutely.
you're putting yourself in a spotlight of, people might be judging you or misperceiving you or whatever, but you're so brave to just be all out and not let those, fears come in and stop you from expressing yourself. So, yeah.
Yeah. And just adding to that, there is the proper time and place
Mhm.
for vulnerability. In a circle like ours,
Mm.
where, we talk about confidentiality and everybody agrees to like holding the thing in confidence. All of you is welcome here. That's the kind of safe container, as we call it, a
Mhm.
safe space. We're being vulnerable like that. It may not be good to be that vulnerable with, you know, a f someone that may not be a good friend or
Mhm.
maybe a partner that is not willing to be equally vulnerable. It might be used against us at some point in the future. So we have to come to a level of discernment about
Mhm.
when it's good to be vulnerable and when it's not, when you might be better off withholding yourself.
Yes, I totally agree. I just remember a conversation I had with this woman who's expressing how it's kind of frustrating to be vulnerable with her partner and then receiving back, like telling her, like, you're too emotional, like it's annoying.
Right.
It's not a safe space. And it's so sad when you have that directly from your partner. So I can see why a lot of people are having a hard time being vulnerable because of those circumstances.
Sure. Yeah. That's the thing. If your feelings are invalidated, that's not a safe place to be vulnerable. Right. And if you shouldn't feel that way, get over it, or toughen up, or too much drama. Messages like that. If you're getting those kind of messages, that's not a safe place to be vulnerable.
Yeah, that's a good thing to point out. Like, what are, like, some things that you can pay attention to know if this is actually a person that we can be vulnerable with. So just you said, what are those words that the
Yeah.
invalidation?
Yeah. Well, those are the kind of words of invalidation. When somebody says, tell me more about what you're feeling, that's a safer place to be, or if somebody says, oh yeah, I felt like that too, but here's what I did to get over it, here, that's maybe not a safe place to be vulnerable either, because all they want to do rather than listen to you is
Mm,
they want to talk about their own experience and how it relates to your experience. And, I'm an expert. I'll give you plenty of advice on this. It's like you don't want to go a lot deeper with that person.
exactly. And this is something that I want to learn more as well. Like, I want to be able to encourage vulnerability with people around me. I want to hold a safe space. The problem is, I'm not sure what to say.
Mm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So, if you feel like there's somebody that is expressing something to you that, what should I say, might benefit from a deeper conversation, it might be, well, what are you feeling right now? As you're thinking about that, what are you feeling right now? And, allowing the person to speak from their heart rather than their head, their thoughts. Where thoughts come from here, feelings come from here, and so we're so accustomed to speaking from here
mhm,
that when somebody makes an invitation to really, yeah, but what does it feel like to you right now? What are you feeling? What emotion you have inside there? It's an invitation. It's a really sweet invitation to become authentic and vulnerable. And you might get through that conversation deeper awareness of yourself,
mhm.
but what comes out, or by maybe what's reflected back to you in a conscious conversation.
It's nice. It's something I can apply, ask those kind of question to someone. Now, another thing is, part of me doesn't want to go deep into that conversation because I'm afraid I might get swallowed in the emotion, or it would affect my energy. Like, what are some of the ways that you actually do for you not to get affected and still be able to hold that space?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think what you're referring to is drama.
Mm,
There's a term that I've used called energy vampire, which is what a lot of people are, that if they're feeling down or if they're feeling bad or whatever, they want to draw other people into that dramatic scenario where they feel the same way. And you're essentially sucking energy like a vampire sucks blood out of a human being, right? They're sucking your energy and that energizes them. So yeah, that again, with discernment, you come to better understand, if this person really wants to speak from their heart or whether they want to, suck your energy. It's just something on a situational basis. You have to just decide for yourself. And if it's the latter, probably the best thing you can do for yourself is put some space between yourself and the other person.
How do you approach that though when it's a close friend, like it's your close friend, and but you already get this energy that I think this person's just not really wanting any help from me, but just wanting to vent out, but I feel like it's sucking my energy right now. So how can you express it in a gentle way?
Yeah, I wish I had a generalization to respond to
Hmm.
that. It's like again, the thing that I would guess would be useful is like, what are you feeling right now?
Hmm.
And go from what their thoughts and their venting is all about to what they're actually feeling and what the cause of that might be. As one of the ways that we really get to our feelings is to breathe,
Mm.
close our eyes, breathe deeply, and follow our breath into our body and try to locate that part of our body where our emotions reside. And then, you know, stay there long enough to determine if it has a shape or color or a message. What message is it trying to give us? And, that involves some facilitation work. And it's maybe not something that you'd want to do unless you've been the recipient of that kind of
Mhm.
facilitation, a number of times. But, it's real simple to say, well, stop, stop. Tell me what you're feeling right now. And allow that person to kind of take a step back from venting or
Mhm.
thoughts, into what really exists in my body right now.
Yeah. I
If,
think
if I was going to generalize, I guess I'd say that would probably be the best way.
yeah. I think that's a good idea to actually let them like because the tendency for me is like I'm trying to to solve the problem for them, so that exhausts me. Whereas I will just kind of guide them and let them figure what they're really feeling and try to find a solution for themselves that works for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's like, take my advice. I'm not using it, you know? So advice is not something that is typically helpful for the person you might be talking about. What we are really trying to do as, facilitators or good friends is trying to ask the kind of questions that allow them to, it's like, what do you think is the solution? Well, I don't know. Well, if you did know, what would you think the solution would be? And so you're inviting it to go a little bit deeper than I
Mhm.
don't know, which is a kind of a surface reaction. It's like into deeper self reflection and solve their own problems. Right.
Exactly. And I think that is a much better way, and it would be more fulfilling for both people, the one venting out and the one who's actually listening. Like once they walk out of that conversation, it will be more fulfilling because you were able to hold space and ask question, and the person is able to
And it
actually
creates
figure.
bond. It
Exactly.
creates this like intimate bond that takes your relationship to a deeper level.
Exactly. I love that. Well, I have some notes here about this voice dialogue and embracing yourself. Like, can you tell me more about this, Bobby?
Yeah. So doctors Cal and Sidra Stone wrote a book called Embracing Ourselves, gosh, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago, in which they said that, there are voices that exist within us or selves that exist within us that sometimes have cross purposes.
Mm,
And we've all experienced it when we've come to a decision point and it's like, well, maybe I should. And then some other voice comes up and says, maybe I should, and so, they've come up with a series of names that they've given to different aspects of ourselves that are pretty common among all of us. And the book is just awesome in describing these different aspects of self, what they call selves that reside within us. And
mhm,
so as we become more familiar with those voices and how they're all acting in our best interest,
mm,
they might be acting completely opposite from one another, but each of those voices has our best interest at heart. As we become more aware of those, I like the analogy of driving a bus.
mm.
There is a critical aspect of myself that's driving the bus. When I become aware of that critical aspect of myself, I can gently ask it to step to the rear of the bus and I can get behind the wheel, right? I can become more effective
Mhm.
in decision making, yeah, in decision making primarily.
Can you set like a scenario or example that would actually have those dialogues in your head and how you like listen to each of those voices and decided to like, who took the wheel and drove the
Yeah.
bus?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll just go back to a piece of work that I did that
Hmm.
just a few weeks ago, which is I am a writer. I have written a lot, hundreds and hundreds of articles and a book. And the purpose of writing is in fulfillment or pursuit of my mission about helping and encouraging each of us to achieve our spirit's greatness. So, you know, with 73 years of age comes a certain degree of life wisdom about having done things wrong enough
Mm.
before I realized that I've been doing them wrong and started to learn from my experiences. And so, yeah, so that goes from, takes knowledge, what we know up
Hmm.
here into wisdom, which is something that is deeply held within. So I'm a writer and I've had writer's block for much of the last 2 years.
Mm.
I'm a good writer. I have my mother endowed me with a real talent for writing. I've been told that by a number of people, but I've not had the desire to write much in the last couple of years.
Mm.
And so there's this one voice within me that says, look, come on, you're at a different stage of life now. You're in the winter stage of life, and the winter stage of life is about being rather than
Mm.
doing. And so don't drive yourself so hard. Really enjoy the now moment, you know, being self-reflective and so on and so forth. You don't need to drive yourself to try to get that wisdom out into the
Mhm.
world. And then there's another part of myself that says, yeah, but,
Mm.
it's like you have this talent, you have these gifts, right? It's part of your life's purpose of helping, encouraging each of us to achieve our spirit's greatness. Put that out there for consumption, and the right people will find their way to it. And oh, by the way, as we went deeper into the process, it's like, oh, well, here's what you get when you listen to me.
Mhm.
It's like they're writing for me is a kind of a self-revelatory process. It's like sometimes when I write, I learn something that I didn't know I knew, right? It's as if some force is working through me, channeling through me, to write the words and whatever the topic is. And I look at it after I've written it, I'm like, oh, I didn't realize I knew that, so it tends to be a very fulfilling process when I really make a practice out of it. If I just do it once in a while, it's, in response to a question, it's not all that great, but
Mhm.
the more thought and reflection and contemplation that I put into a question, into a response to a question, it's like it becomes a real, again, revelatory process for me. It's like I didn't know I knew, or
Mm.
maybe I didn't know that. Maybe that's something that was channeled through me, in order to respond to this question.
Now, how do you make the decision of which to listen to? Because both of the voices, they have like very strong stand for each of them. Like, you know, how do you make the decision of which one to actually follow?
Well, that's where the stretch and accountability thing comes in, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, and that realization of those two different voices came out of having made a stretch to
Mm-hmm.
write a new article this coming week
Mm.
that I didn't do. I procrastinated, and we came back to the next self-development meeting and the next self stretch and accountability round. It's like, what? Why didn't I do it?
Mm.
I made the stretch. Why did I procrastinate? And then I went through this process, it's fortunately facilitated for me. I had set it up in advance for somebody to facilitate this process. And I found those two voices, right?
Mm.
And so now with this awareness of those two voices, I can choose which one pay attention to, which one to
Mm.
prioritize and consciously make a decision to, put this one in the
Mm.
driver's seat versus this one, right?
Exactly. I think that's really powerful to acknowledge that we actually have different voices in our head. Because I think, well, for my own personal experience, I had those experiences even when I was a kid. And because I don't really understand why, I felt even scared of my own self. Like, my God, am I going crazy now? Why am I hearing two different voices, but with two different opinion as well? But now, as I'm an adult and I'm learning more about myself and aspects of our being, understanding that there are actually different aspects of me. Part of this other voice is influenced by the culture that I grew up with, and this other voice is actually influenced by the learnings that I'm now acquiring, and my way of kind of deciding which voice I want to listen to is actually I'm applying that feeling of which one really sits right for me right now in this moment, which one really resonates for me is this voice. And when I realize, like, oh no, this is not me really talking. These are just the belief that is passed on to me. And therefore, I want to like shut up this voice and turn it off because it doesn't serve me anymore. So that
Mm,
for me was helpful. And I
mm.
love that I'm getting reminded of this voice dialogue thing because I haven't been paying attention to it. I never think of it for a while now. And I think this would be very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. And then even after you come to that awareness, there still is, oh, I want to let this guy drive. Well,
Mm,
then what is your stretch for the coming week? And are you willing to be held accountable for
mm,
meeting that stretch in the following week? So, again, going back to the value of the stretch and accountability
mhm.
process, it just has huge value for anybody that's, focused on self-development.
Exactly. I really love this topic that we're talking, and I think we could, talk more, like endless, infinitely about this one. But
Yeah.
our time is running. So I'll just have some wrap up question that I would love to ask to you, Bobby. Like, first is, you're a life coach, a mentor, you're helping other people. But if you actually would hire someone, a coach for yourself, what would be what area of your growth would you seek help with?
Well, that's a good question. I would say probably having to do with relationships,
Hmm.
having to do with building a solid and secure and intimate relationship with a partner. I would say that that's, even though I've made huge strides, in
Hmm.
over years of self-development work, I still don't feel like I'm the ideal partner. I don't feel like I'm where I want to be in terms
Hmm.
of being a partner.
Totally understand that. And I actually find it really hard for, like, if I, right now, Ila and I are doing so much work to really make our relationship working and really understand each other. We read books together, we do habits and practices together, yet there are still times where we always go sideways and still trigger each other.
Uh-huh.
So I think, having another person, a third party person that could, guide you or hold space would actually be something helpful for a relationship. And I couldn't imagine other couple who's not even paying attention, like what kind of relationship are they even into? So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's beautiful. Well, and if you were speaking to this last question, like if you were speaking with someone who wants to take more ownership of their personal journey, what resources could you actually recommend to them, like book, YouTube channel, that would help them emerge as a better version of themselves?
God, this embracing ourselves book would be a really, something I could recommend to anyone who's really interested in a deeper self knowledge. Again, that's Hal and Sidra Stone. It's available, gosh, I don't know, pretty much on Kindle or Google Play Book. I slipped on the rest of your question. Could you ask your question again, Gladys? Because I got sidetracked there.
No problem. Yes, like basically resources that you can share to people that have helped you and that you think might be valuable for them. So, one you've mentioned is Embracing Yourself. This is a book, right? Mhm.
Yes. Yeah. There's also, again, I've been really fascinated with the archetypal aspect of this middle essence
Mm,
thing. And for somebody that's in their 20s, it's a big deal, but it's a pretty archetypal life change for most people to get in their 40s or 50s.
mm,
And there's a number of books that have been written about it. And again, that's a time where, everything that I've done before doesn't seem to have any meaning. What's my purpose in life now?
mhm,
I mean, if I'm not going to do that anymore, what am I going to do now? What's my purpose in life and what has meaning for me?
mm.
Yeah. So that, there's a book called the first time that I got onto that, there's a book called Halftime by Bob Buford. Yeah. And then there's a great YouTube video by Dr. Wayne Dyer called The Shift. And for somebody that wants to understand kind of the makeup of that middle essence experience and how one moves through that, gracefully, I think The Shift would be a great starting point.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing this, Bobby. This is very timely. I've talked with two people already who's in that age group, and they're actually expressing like, I don't know what I'm gonna do anymore. Like, I'm not sure what my purpose in life. I'm feeling depressed or unhappy and fulfilled. For me personally, I have a lot of drive and passion with what I'm doing, and I feel like I know where I'm headed to. So it's
Yeah.
hard for me to relate. So having these resources, like I think it would help me to just give them something like I may not be able to relate to what you're doing or to what you're experiencing, but maybe this resources could help you. So thank you for sharing this,
Yeah.
Bobby.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
yes, and before we wrap up, is there anything like that you would like to share to before we end this conversation? Something that I might have missed to ask?
I think, no, certainly you've done a great job of interviewing. And the thing that I would suggest to anybody who might be watching something of this ilk, casually, it's like the self-development journey is the most worthwhile aspect of life. Coming to know oneself, coming to know one's purpose. There's four great questions, the four great questions that I was introduced to about 20 years ago, which is like, who am I? Why am I here? What are my gifts? And how am I giving them to the world? And those are just awesome questions, to ask for someone who might be in that transition.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what are my gifts? I mean, who am I is like, if you're in that middle essence period,
Mm-hmm.
you don't know who you are because, you used to know who you are, but you don't know who you are now.
Mm-hmm.
Why am I here? What's my purpose? What's my life's purpose? What do I offer to the world in service to the world?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What are my gifts? Which is really an interesting question. It's like, what kind of things have I done in the past that have had meaning and have led to benefits for others? Right. And then how am I giving them to the world? It's like reflecting on that question. It's like, okay, if I know what my gifts are, how can I give them away more broadly, to more people? And yeah, so those are pretty cool questions, for somebody that's entering that middle essence or stuck in the middle of the middle essence. Because there's two ways to go out of middle essence. You can keep doing what you're doing and getting
Mm-hmm.
less and less fulfillment and meaning out of it. And, just end up with a meaningless life, is just on autopilot
All right.
you know? And the other way is to come out of adolescence with a whole new purpose and meaning to your life and like the desire to help others, to help the world with, you know, what or what you've done.
That's
Yeah.
so beautiful. Thank you, Bobby, for sharing this. Such a powerful question to actually end this conversation. And I think it would be really helpful. And I hope that, this interview that we're doing will land to those who needed to hear this. And
Mm,
I have strong faith in that. I
yeah.
guess we can conclude this interview from here. Thank you so much, Bobby, for joining me in this conversation. Really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure.